Wild West love stories. Tales of passion, written on the American frontier.
The wind that swept through the alleyways of Redemption Gulch was not merely cold, it was a phantom predator, armed with teeth of ice and a howl that promised desolation. It tore at the brittle fabric of Clara Mae Thompson's shawl, a useless token against a Wyoming winter determined to claim her. Huddled in the narrow space between the saloon and the gunsmith's shop, she was a ghost haunting her own life, invisible to the warm, boisterous world just a few feet away. The taunting aroma of roasted meat and warm bread that drifted from the saloon's swinging doors was a cruelty worse than the cold, a reminder of a life she could see but no longer touch. The gnawing void in her belly had become a constant companion, a dull ache that echoed the emptiness in her heart. 3 days had passed since her last real meal, an eternity measured in shivering breaths and fading hope. Then, a shadow fell over her. "Well now, what's a pretty little dove like you doing out in the freeze?" The voice was thick with cheap whiskey and a casual malice that made Clara's skin crawl. Jedediah Stone loomed over her, his bulk blocking the faint lantern light, his yellowed grin a promise of everything she feared. She tried to make herself smaller, to melt into the frozen brick behind her, but there was nowhere left to retreat. "Leave me be," she whispered, her voice a fragile wisp of sound. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "I've got a better idea. A warm room, a hot meal. A fair trade," he'd called it. Her body for a bowl of stew. It was the devil's bargain, offered at the very edge of the abyss. As his hand reached for her arm, a second voice cut through the wind, a voice that was not loud, but carried the weight of cold steel and granite. The lady said no. From the mouth of the alley, a figure emerged, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette against the swirling snow, a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. The lamplight caught the stark line of a scar that carved a pale river down his cheek, a mark of past violence that strangely promised present safety. The clash was inevitable, a moment of truth in a forgotten alley. To discover how this desperate bargain unfolds, to see if a stranger's courage can light a fire in the coldest of nights, stay with us. And if you believe in the courage of the human heart, like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales from the untamed frontier. Part 1. Whispers in the Wind. The air in the alley crackled with a tension colder than the frost forming on the wooden barrels. Jedediah Stone, his whiskey-fueled confidence faltering, turned to face the newcomer. He was a bull of a man, used to getting his way through brute force and intimidation, but the man standing before him was something different. He wasn't a brawler spoiling for a fight. He was a mountain, immovable and silent. Silas Kane did not raise his voice, nor did he draw the pistol that rested easy on his hip. He simply stood there, his steely gray eyes fixed on Jed, an unwavering gaze that held no anger, only a finality that was far more unnerving. Jed puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt to reclaim his dominance. "This ain't your concern, Scarface," he snarled. Silas's expression didn't flicker. "You made it my concern when you stopped listening." A long moment stretched, filled only by the mournful cry of the wind. Jed's eyes darted from Silas's calm face to Clara's huddled form and back again. He was a predator who had just met a wolf, and his instinct for self-preservation, buried deep beneath layers of liquor and arrogance, finally surfaced. With a guttural curse, he spat onto the snow near Silas's boots. "She ain't worth the trouble," he muttered, turning and lumbering back toward the warmth and noise of the saloon, his bluster deflating with every step. Clara sagged against the brick wall, the adrenaline that had kept her upright draining away, leaving her trembling and weak. The stranger, this Silas Kane, turned his attention to her. His assessment was quiet, thorough, and devoid of the predatory hunger she was so used to seeing in men's eyes. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. She could only nod, unable to trust her own voice. Words were a luxury, and she had spent the last of hers on no. He must have seen the lie in her eyes, the stark truth of her condition. Without another word, he shrugged off his heavy, sheepskin-lined duster coat and draped it around her shoulders. The sudden weight was a shock, but the warmth that seeped into her frozen limbs was a miracle. It smelled of worn leather, pine smoke, and cold, clean air, the scent of a world she had forgotten existed. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot against her icy skin. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice cracking. "Every soul deserves a bit of warmth," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He hesitated for a moment, then held out a gloved hand. "My name is Silas Kane. I own a ranch a few hours from here." Clara stared at the offered hand, then at his face, searching for the catch, the hidden ledger where this debt would be recorded. "I'm Clara Mae Thompson." "I know," he said, surprising her. "Folks talk, but I prefer to make my own judgments." His gaze was direct. "My point is, I need a housekeeper. The place has been without a woman's touch for too long. The pay is room, board, and a wage. Honest work." The offer hung in the air between them, a lifeline she hadn't dared to pray for. It was too simple, too clean. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice hard with suspicion. "I just told you," he replied, his patience unwavering. "To cook, to clean, to keep the house in order." He saw the doubt still etched on her face. "The work is hard and the ranch is isolated, but the offer is an honest one." She looked from his scarred face back to the saloon, where men like Jed Stone were laughing, and knew there was no real choice to be made. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she wasn't completely alone. The journey to the Kane Ranch was a silent one, a passage through a world rendered in shades of white and gray. The wagon wheels crunched a lonely rhythm on the snow-packed trail, and the vast, unending landscape seemed to swallow the sound. Clara sat stiffly on the wagon bench, clutching the heavy duster around her, the warmth a constant, startling reminder of the stranger beside her. Silas Kane handled the reins with an easy competence, his focus on the path ahead, his profile as rugged and unyielding as the mountains that loomed like sleeping giants in the distance. She studied him from the corner of her eye, this quiet savior. He was not a man who wasted words. Her few attempts at conversation, questions about the distance, the weather, were met with answers that were brief, yet not unkind. The silence felt different from the threatening quiet of the alley. It was a stillness born of solitude, not menace. It was unsettling in its own way. She was accustomed to men who filled the air with boasts and promises, men who used words as tools to get what they wanted. Silas Kane seemed to want nothing more than the horizon. After what felt like an eternity, they crested a ridge, and the world opened up below them. There it was. The ranch was not a grand estate, but a collection of sturdy, unpretentious buildings that seemed to have grown from the land itself. A two-story house with a wide porch stood as the heart of the homestead, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a faint, welcoming breath. A large barn, a corral, and several smaller outbuildings huddled nearby, all blanketed in a thick layer of pristine snow. It was isolated, beautiful, and intimidating all at once. "This is it," Silas said, his first unsolicited words since they'd left town. He pulled the wagon to a halt before the house and jumped down, his boots sinking into the snow. He moved to help her, and she flinched instinctively as he reached for her, but his touch was impersonal, steadying, and he released her as soon as her feet were on solid ground. The air inside the house was cold, thick with the scent of wood smoke long dead and the faint dust of neglect. The furniture was heavy and dark, built to last, but everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. It was undeniably a bachelor's home, functional and devoid of warmth or softness, yet it felt solid, safe. "Your room is upstairs. Second on the left," he instructed, already moving toward the hearth to build a fire. Clara climbed the creaking stairs, her legs aching with exhaustion. The room was small and spare, containing only a simple iron-framed bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a small washstand. But it was clean, and through the single window, she could see the endless expanse of snow-covered plains giving way to the distant mountains. On the bed lay a handmade quilt, its colors faded by time and sun into a soft tapestry of blues and greens. She ran a hand over the intricate stitching, a silent testament to a woman's care from long ago. A room, a quilt, a door she could close. These simple things felt like unimaginable luxuries. Downstairs, the crackle of a newly lit fire was followed by the scent of brewing coffee. When she returned to the main room, Silas had a plate waiting for her on the simple wooden table. Thick slices of bread, cold salted pork, and a wedge of cheese. It was the most beautiful meal she had ever seen. Her hands trembled as she ate, the simple, hearty food a balm to her starved body. They ate in a shared silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. After they finished, Silas leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes finding hers across the table. "There's something that needs to be said, Miss Thompson," he began, his tone serious. "This is a small community. A bachelor hiring a young woman, especially one in your circumstances, will cause talk." Clara's spine stiffened. She had been waiting for this. "They'll whisper that you're trading more than housekeeping for your keep." He met her gaze directly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "I want you to know that whatever they say, it doesn't change the terms of your employment. This is a job. You'll earn your wage. What happens under this roof is our business and our business alone. As long as you do the work, you have a place here." He stood then, ending the conversation. "Get some rest. We start early." As Clara lay in her bed that night, wrapped in the faded quilt, listening to the storm rage outside, she felt a sensation she couldn't name. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But as the wind howled and the house stood firm around her, she recognized the feeling of a fragile, unfamiliar seed of hope beginning to stir in the frozen ground of her heart. Part 2. A flicker of trust. Life on the Kane Ranch settled into a quiet, demanding rhythm, governed by the rising of the sun and the needs of the land. For Clara, each day was a lesson in a life she had never known. The world, which had once been a terrifying expanse of uncertainty, shrank to the comforting confines of the ranch house, the barn, and the vast, silent fields of snow. Her hands, once soft and accustomed to needlepoint, grew calloused from scrubbing floors, kneading dough, and hauling buckets of water from the well. The work was relentless and exhausting, but it was honest. Each night, she fell into bed with an ache in her muscles that felt more satisfying than any comfort she had ever known, for it was the ache of purpose. Silas Kane remained a man of few words, an enigma wrapped in quiet competence. He would leave before dawn to tend to his cattle, his broad shoulders disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom, and return long after dusk, smelling of hay, horse, and the cold winter air. He was a constant, steady presence, as reliable as the sunrise, yet as distant as the mountains on the horizon. Clara's greatest challenge was the formidable cast-iron stove that dominated the kitchen. It was a temperamental beast, with its own moods and whims. One morning, while attempting to fry bacon, a burst of grease ignited, and a lick of flame shot up, catching the sleeve of her dress. A scream escaped her lips before she could stifle it, a raw sound of pure panic. The back door burst open, and Silas was there in an instant, his face a mask of concern. He moved with a speed that belied his calm nature, grabbing a nearby sack of flour and smothering the flames with a few efficient slaps. The fire was out as quickly as it had started, leaving behind the acrid smell of burnt cotton and the sight of Clara, trembling, her face pale with shock. She braced herself for the anger, the recriminations, the dismissal she felt she deserved. A clumsy charity case who couldn't even be trusted not to burn his house down. I'm so sorry, she stammered, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. I'm a fool. Silas didn't shout. He didn't even frown. He simply took the blackened pan from her shaking hands and set it aside. It's just a dress, Clara, and a bit of bacon. He looked from her face to the stove. This old thing has a mean temper. It's not you, it's the dampers. They stick. For the next hour, he didn't just tell her how to use the stove, he showed her. He guided her hand to the flue handle, explaining how to read the color of the flames, how to listen for the subtle shifts in the roar of the fire. His hands were large and calloused, but his touch as he guided her was surprisingly gentle. He spoke in a low, patient voice, breaking down the complex task into simple, understandable steps. In that hour, Clara learned more than just how to manage a stove. She saw a side of Silas Kane he kept hidden from the world. She saw his patience, his innate kindness, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his scarred face and imposing figure. He treated her not as a burden or a charity case, but as a student worthy of his time. It was a form of respect she hadn't been shown in a very long time, and it settled in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. The quiet acts of kindness continued, small gestures that spoke volumes more than words ever could. A few days after the incident with the stove, Clara returned to her room after a long day of cleaning to find a small, neatly wrapped parcel on her quilt. Inside, she found a pair of thick, woolen stockings and a new, heavy shawl, the color of a deep forest green. There was no note, no explanation. He never mentioned it, and neither did she, but the next morning, when she came downstairs wearing the new shawl, his eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and a flicker of something, approval, perhaps even a faint smile, passed across his lips. He was a man who communicated through action, not sentiment. He fixed the loose floorboard on the landing that always creaked, planed the swollen kitchen drawer that always stuck, and replaced a cracked pane of glass in the parlor window, all without being asked, all without seeking thanks. He was mending the broken pieces of his house, and in doing so, it felt as if he were trying to mend the broken pieces of her life as well. Her first trip into Redemption Gulch with Silas was a trial. As they walked toward the general store, she could feel the weight of eyes upon her, the way conversations quieted as they passed. She was the subject of whispers, the fallen woman taken in by the reclusive rancher. She held her head high, her back straight, but inside, she felt herself shrinking. The store was run by Martha Gable, a stern-faced widow whose sharp eyes seemed to miss nothing. Mrs. Gable's greeting to Silas was polite, but her gaze toward Clara was cold and assessing, filled with the judgment Clara had been dreading. As they gathered their supplies, Clara overheard two women whispering by the fabric bolts, their words like stinging nettles. "That's her." The one Thornton pulled from the alley. Shameless. She felt the blood rush to her cheeks, a hot wave of shame. Just as she was about to turn and flee, Silas, who had seemingly been engrossed in inspecting a new axe handle, spoke without turning around. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the store's low hum. "Mrs. Gable," he said, "I believe the winter has been hard on everyone's charity." A pointed silence fell over the store. The whispering stopped. It was not an accusation, but a quiet, firm rebuke. He had defended her, not by causing a scene, but by holding up a mirror to their own harshness. Later that week, while dusting the quiet, seldom used parlor, Clara's curiosity finally got the better of her. Tucked behind a row of leather-bound books on the mantelpiece, she found a small, silver-framed photograph. It was a portrait of a younger Silas, his face unmarred by the scar, his smile open and full of light. Leaning into him was a beautiful young woman with dark, laughing eyes and a cascade of dark curls. They looked impossibly happy, caught in a moment of pure, untroubled joy. Her name was Eleonora. Silas's voice from the doorway made her jump, and the frame nearly slipped from her fingers. I'm sorry," she stammered, feeling like an intruder. "I wasn't prying." "It's all right," he said, stepping into the room. His face was unreadable, a curtain drawn over his emotions. He took the photograph from her, his thumb gently tracing the edge of the frame. "She was my fiancée, was supposed to be my wife." He paused, his gaze lost in the past. "A fever took her. 3 winters ago. The same winter I got this." He touched the scar on his cheek. She believed everyone deserved a second chance. Said a person's worth wasn't measured by their worst mistake. He placed the photograph back on the mantel, this time in full view. And in that moment, Clara began to understand the true depth of the quiet, scarred man who had offered her a home. He wasn't just hiding from his own grief, he was honoring the memory of a woman who believed in redemption. Part 3. The Serpent's Shadow. The arrival of the first real thaw felt like a promise. The iron grip of winter began to loosen, and the snow receded from the fields, revealing the dark, fertile earth beneath. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The ranch had become a sanctuary, a place where her past could not reach her, and Silas's quiet companionship had become a comforting presence. The fragile seed of hope that had been planted on her first night had taken root, and she was beginning to believe that a new life might just be possible. But the past is a patient hunter, and hers arrived on a fine Tuesday morning, riding a magnificent black stallion and dressed in a tailored Eastern suit that was glaringly out of place in the rugged Wyoming landscape. Clara was hanging laundry on the line, the crisp breeze catching the white sheets, when she saw the rider approaching. Even from a distance, she recognized the arrogant posture, the perfect, practiced ease in the saddle. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in her stomach. It was her cousin, Elias Vance. Silas came out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression immediately wary. Elias dismounted with a fluid grace, tying his horse to the rail as if he owned the place. He swept his hat off, revealing perfectly coiffed dark hair, and smiled a brilliant, predatory smile. It was a smile Clara knew well. It was the one he used right before he destroyed something. "Clara Mae, my dear cousin," he purred, his voice a silken weapon. "I have been searching everywhere for you. You can imagine our family's distress." He made a show of looking around, his eyes taking in the rustic house, the laundry line, and Silas, his lip curling in a faint, dismissive sneer. "To think we'd find you in a place like this." Clara's hands clenched the wet sheet in her fists. "I am not lost, Elias, and I am not yours to find." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew cold. Now, is that any way to greet the man who has come to take you home? Your father is worried sick." "My father disowned me on your word," she shot back, her voice trembling but firm. "Do not speak to me of his worry." Elias's gaze shifted to Silas, dismissing him as little more than a piece of scenery. "And you must be the man of the house. Vance. Elias Vance." He extended a gloved hand, which Silas ignored. "I've come to collect my cousin. It's a family matter." "Miss Thompson is employed here," Silas stated, his voice flat and uninviting. "She is free to leave if she chooses, but she is not to be collected." Elias's mask of civility slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the ugly sneer beneath. He turned his attention back to Clara. "We have things to discuss, cousin. Private things." His eyes flickered downward, to the pocket of her apron. "Things of great sentimental value, like our grandfather's journal, the one you were so fond of. Father would be most pleased to have it returned." The journal, that was it. It wasn't about her. It was about the small, leather-bound book her father had given her, the one where he had recorded his thoughts, his business dealings, and his growing suspicions about Elias's methods. That journal was the proof she held, the reason Elias could not let her disappear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. Elias's smile returned, colder than ever. "Oh, I think you do. You will come home with me, Clara. One way or another. This rustic interlude of yours is over." He tipped his hat to Silas. "You've been charitable, I'm sure, but her place is with her family." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a chilling silence in his wake. The peace of the ranch had been shattered, and Clara knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The threat Elias Vance left behind lingered in the air long after the sound of his horse's hooves had faded. It was a poison that seeped into the newfound peace of the ranch, turning Clara's sanctuary into a place of fearful waiting. Silas did not press her for details, but a new, protective watchfulness entered his eyes. He spent more time near the house, his rifle never far from reach, his quiet presence a constant, reassuring shield. Clara, however, knew that a shield could only hold for so long. She had to face this. The following day, necessity forced them into Redemption Gulch for supplies. The moment they stepped into Martha Gable's general store, Clara knew Elias had been there before them. The atmosphere was thick with it. The usual whispers that followed her had been amplified into a low, condemning hum. Elias was holding court near the counter, a cup of coffee in his hand, regaling a small group of townsmen, including Sheriff Brody, with a story. He paused as Clara and Silas entered, a look of performative relief washing over his features. "Clara Mae! Thank heavens!" He rushed to her side, his voice filled with false concern for all to hear. "I was just telling Sheriff Brody how you vanished. We were so worried you'd fallen into dangerous company." He cast a meaningful glance at Silas's scarred face. Clara pulled her arm from his grasp. "I am in no danger, Elias." Elias sighed dramatically. "My dear, naive cousin, this man," he gestured to Silas, "is a recluse, a man with a violent past. And you, in your delicate state, you ran away after a misunderstanding about some missing family funds. I am simply here to clear your name and bring you home before you come to harm." The accusation hung in the air, thick and venomous. Missing funds. He was already painting her as a thief, a hysterical runaway. Sheriff Brody, a man who preferred a quiet life, looked uncomfortable but swayed by the confident, well-dressed man from the east. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, "Mr. Vance has expressed some serious concerns." "He's a liar," Clara said, her voice clear and steady, though her hands were shaking. She looked around at the faces staring at her, suspicious, judging. Then her eyes met Martha Gable's. The store owner had been silent, watching the entire exchange with her sharp, discerning eyes, her expression unreadable. "Oh, cousin, your accusations wound me," Elias said, placing a hand over his heart. "After all I've done to protect you." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper only she could hear. "Give me the journal, and all of this goes away. Refuse, and I will bury you in disgrace so deep no one will ever find you." It was then that Martha Gable moved. She set down the jar of beans she'd been weighing with a decisive thud. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You've been in my store for an hour, spinning tales and drinking my coffee, but you haven't bought a single thing." She turned her sharp gaze on the sheriff. "And you, Sheriff Brody? It seems to me you're listening to the man with the shiniest boots instead of the one with the most character." It was a small act of defiance, but in the charged atmosphere of the store, it was a cannon blast. The townsmen shifted uncomfortably. Elias, for the first time, looked momentarily flustered, his perfect performance interrupted. He shot Mrs. Gable a look of pure venom before regaining his composure. "I see my cousin has found herself a champion." He turned to leave. "This is not over. A formal complaint will be filed." As the door swung shut behind him, a heavy silence remained. Clara looked at Mrs. Gable, her heart filled with a surge of gratitude. The older woman simply gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod before turning back to her work. The battle lines had been drawn. And in the most unexpected of places, Clara had found an ally. The midpoint had been reached. She was no longer just a victim hiding from her past. Now, she had to fight for her future. Part 4. The Weight of a Lie. True to his word, Elias Vance moved with the swift, merciless precision of a striking snake. 2 days after the confrontation in the general store, Sheriff Brody rode out to the ranch, his expression grim, a folded warrant clutched in his hand. He was not alone. 2 deputies flanked him, their presence turning the quiet homestead into a place of official, grim business. Clara saw them coming from the kitchen window, and the dish towel she was holding slipped from her numb fingers. The moment she had been dreading was here. Silas met them on the porch, positioning himself squarely in front of the door. He stood not as a man looking for a fight, but as an immovable object, a guardian of his home. "Sheriff," he greeted, his voice calm and even. Sheriff Brody had the decency to look ashamed. "Silas, I'm not here for you." He unfolded the warrant, the paper crinkling loudly in the tense silence. "I have a warrant for the arrest of one Clara Mae Thompson on the charge of theft of property and funds from her legal guardian, Nathaniel Vance." He cleared his throat. "Elias Vance has filed a formal, sworn complaint backed by 2 signed affidavits from back east. I have no choice but to take her in." "You always have a choice, Brody," Silas said, his voice dropping low. "And right now, you're choosing to believe a man in a fancy suit over a woman trying to build an honest life." Clara stepped out onto the porch then, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve a fire in her eyes. She would not hide behind him. "The charges are lies, Sheriff," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Brody sighed, his gaze dropping to his boots. "Ma'am, that may be, but that's for a judge to decide. My job is to serve the warrant. Now, please, come along quietly. Don't make this difficult." The deputies shifted, their hands moving closer to the pistols on their hips. The air was thick with the threat of violence. It was then that Silas did something unexpected. He looked directly at the sheriff, his eyes holding a shared history of living in this hard land. "You know how I got this scar, Brody?" he asked, the question so out of place that it momentarily disarmed everyone. The sheriff frowned. "Heard you got thrown from a horse onto a barbed wire fence." Silas shook his head slowly. "No. I got this trying to stop a man much like Elias Vance from cheating a homesteader's widow out of her land claim. He had money, influence, and a piece of paper he said was legal. Everyone told me to stay out of it, to mind my own business." He paused, his voice resonating with a deep, quiet power. "I didn't listen then, and I'm not listening now. This warrant is built on lies, and you know it. Elias Vance wants to silence her because she knows the truth about his dirty dealings. That is the real crime here." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the sheriff's conscience. Brody was visibly torn, his duty warring with the respect he held for Silas Kane, a man known for his unwavering integrity. "Silas, my hands are tied," he said, his voice strained. "The law is the law." "Then the law is being used as a weapon," Silas countered. He turned to Clara. "We need proof. Something to fight this with." Clara's mind raced. The journal. It was her only weapon. But it was hidden, and retrieving it now was impossible. Her eyes darted toward the town, toward the one person who had shown her a sliver of support. "Mrs. Gable, she said suddenly. Martha Gable. She saw how Elias acted. She knows he's a bully. Silas's eyes lit with understanding. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. He turned back to the sheriff. Give us until tomorrow, he pleaded. Just 24 hours. Let me ride into town, talk to people. Let me find something to prove this is a sham. If I can't, she'll go with you peaceably. I give you my word. Sheriff Brody hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He looked from Silas's determined face to Clara's frightened but resolute one. Finally, with a deep sigh of resignation, he made his choice. Against my better judgment. You have until noon tomorrow, Silas. Then I'm coming back, and she's coming with me. No more arguments. He nodded to his deputies, and they turned their horses, riding away from the ranch, leaving behind a fragile, temporary truce and the suffocating weight of a ticking clock. The moment the sheriff and his deputies were out of sight, a frantic energy seized the ranch. The temporary reprieve was not a victory, but merely a delay of the inevitable, unless they could perform a miracle. Noon tomorrow. The deadline loomed like a hangman's noose. The journal, Clara said, her voice urgent as she led Silas into the parlor. It's the only real proof I have. It details everything, the money he diverted, the contracts he forged. My father suspected. He wrote it all down. She knelt by the cold hearth, prying loose a stone at the side that had always been slightly unstable. From the dark, dusty cavity behind it, she pulled out a small, leather-bound book. She clutched it to her chest, the worn leather a tangible link to the truth. He can't know I have this. If he even suspects. He won't, Silas said, his expression hardening with resolve. Our first stop is Martha Gable. She's respected. If she speaks up, others might find the courage to do the same. He looked at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon. A storm's coming in. We need to move fast. They rode for Redemption Gulch with a singular purpose, the journal wrapped carefully in oilcloth and tucked into Silas's saddlebag. They found Martha Gable in her store, methodically taking inventory. She looked up as they entered, her sharp eyes immediately sensing the gravity of their situation. Sheriff Brody paid you a visit. I take it, she stated, not a question, but a fact. Silas nodded. Elias Vance has sworn out a warrant. She's to be arrested for theft. Martha let out a disdainful snort. That man is poison in a clean shirt. I knew it the moment I laid eyes on him. Clara stepped forward, her hope resting on this stern-faced woman. Mrs. Gable, we need your help. You saw him. You heard him threaten me. Would you be willing to tell the sheriff what you witnessed? Martha paused, her gaze steady. Standing up to a man like Elias Vance was no small thing in a town that bowed to money and influence. It could be bad for her business, could earn her a powerful enemy. She looked at Clara, at the desperate plea in the young woman's eyes, and saw not a thief, but a fighter. It's one thing to know the truth, child, she said slowly. It's another to make others believe it. She then looked at Silas. But a lie should never be allowed to stand when good folk have the power to knock it down. Yes, I'll speak to the sheriff. What's more, she added, a shrewd glint in her eye, Elias Vance has been bragging all over town about a big land deal he's financing. He's been using the telegraph office day and night. A man that eager to send messages might have a secret he's afraid will get out. The information was a spark in the darkness. A new lead. The telegraph office, Silas said, a plan forming in his mind. If we can find out who he's been wiring, it might lead us to the people he's cheated. He turned to Clara. This is getting more dangerous. I want you to go back to the ranch and lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. I'll stay in town, see what I can find out. Clara hated the idea of leaving him, of hiding while he fought her battles, but she saw the logic in his command. The journal was safest at the ranch, and so was she. She agreed, her heart heavy with dread. As she rode back home, the first flakes of snow began to fall, and the wind began to howl with a rising fury. The coming storm felt like an omen. Back at the ranch, she bolted the door and wedged a chair beneath the handle, her small fortress against the world. She clutched the journal, its secrets both her shield and her burden. The plan was in motion, a desperate gamble against time, the law, and a man who would stop at nothing to win. The weight of the lie was suffocating, and their only hope was that the truth, however heavy, would be strong enough to break it. Part 5. Echoes of Truth. The storm arrived not as a gentle blanket of white, but as a furious, roaring beast. Snow, driven by a relentless wind, fell in a blinding curtain, erasing the world and isolating the Kane ranch in a sea of white. Inside the house, Clara paced the parlor like a caged animal, the leather-bound journal a cold weight in her hands. Every gust of wind that rattled the windows sounded like footsteps on the porch. Every creak of the old house was the sound of a door being forced. The silence between the gusts was even worse, a heavy, listening quiet where her fear could grow unchecked. She trusted Silas, trusted his strength and his intelligence, but he was one man against her cousin's web of lies, and now he was also against a blizzard that could swallow a man whole. Hours bled into one another. Daylight faded into a murky, snow-choked twilight. She lit lanterns, their warm glow pushing back the encroaching shadows, but doing little to soothe the cold dread that had settled deep in her bones. A sudden, violent pounding on the front door made her heart leap into her throat. It wasn't Silas. His knock was firm, steady. This was frantic, demanding. "Clara Mae, I know you're in there." Elias's voice, muffled but unmistakable, cut through the storm's howl. "The good sheriff is tucked away in town, waiting for the storm to pass. It's just you and me." She backed away from the door, her breath catching in her chest. He had come for the journal. He must have known she would be alone. "Go away, Elias," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Silas will be back any moment." A cruel laugh answered her. "The rancher? He's likely freezing to death in a ditch somewhere between here and town. You are alone, cousin. Now, be a good girl and open the door. Give me what belongs to my family, and I might just be merciful." She knew his mercy. She had seen it in the bruises on a young girl's arms years ago, had heard it in the lies that had ruined her own life. She ran to the kitchen, her mind racing. The main door was bolted, but what about the windows? The cellar? She had to think. She couldn't fight him with strength, but her fear was forging itself into a sharp, cold resolve. This house was her sanctuary, and she would not let the serpent into her garden. A loud crack echoed from the back of the house as wood splintered. He was breaking in through the kitchen door. Panic surged, but she forced it down. She grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from its hook beside the stove, its weight a small comfort in her hands. She wouldn't be a helpless victim. She knew this house better than he did, its creaks, its shadows, its secrets. That would be her advantage. She doused the main lantern, plunging the parlor into near darkness, save for the faint, flickering light from the hearth. She moved silently to the side of the doorway leading to the kitchen, pressing herself flat against the wall, the skillet held high. The sound of the kitchen door giving way was followed by the crunch of boots on the floor and a triumphant curse from Elias as he stepped inside. Hiding in the dark, Clara. A fitting place for you. He lit a match, the sudden flare illuminating his arrogant, sneering face as he looked around the empty kitchen. You can't hide forever. I will find you, and I will take what is mine. He took a step toward the parlor, a predator entering the lair, completely unaware that the prey he was hunting had finally decided to grow teeth. Elias stepped from the kitchen into the darkened parlor, the flickering firelight casting long, dancing shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. His arrogance made him careless. He saw an empty room and assumed she was cowering upstairs, trapped. He took another step forward, his back momentarily to the doorway where Clara stood, heart hammering, muscles coiled like a spring. This was her one chance. With a cry that was part fear and part fury, she swung the heavy iron skillet with all her might. The pan connected with the side of Elias's head with a sickening thud. He grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling forward, his lit match flying from his hand and extinguishing on the floor. He was dazed, but not down. He spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, a dark trickle of blood running from his temple. You little witch! He snarled, lunging for her. She scrambled back, the heavy skillet her only shield. He was stronger, faster, and fueled by a cold fury. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she cried out and the skillet clattered to the floor. He backhanded her across the face, the force of the blow sending her sprawling onto the braided rug before the hearth. Her head swam, and the taste of blood filled her mouth. He stood over her, breathing heavily, his polished facade stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. Did you really think that would stop me? He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. Now. The journal. Tell me where it is, or I swear I will burn this house to the ground with you in it. Tears of pain and terror streamed down Clara's face, but as she looked into his merciless eyes, something inside her hardened. She would not break. It's in the barn, she lied, her voice a hoarse whisper. Hidden in the hayloft. It was a desperate gamble, a plea for a few more seconds of life. He sneered, but the lie held a sliver of plausibility. If you're lying to me. He began to drag her toward the door. No, she screamed, clawing at the floorboards. I'll show you. It was in that terrifying moment that the front door burst open, crashing against the inside wall with the force of the blizzard behind it. Silas Kane stood on the threshold, a figure of righteous fury silhouetted against the swirling white maelstrom. Snow and ice clung to his hat and duster, and in his hand he held a shotgun, its twin barrels aimed squarely at Elias's chest. Behind him, looking grim and resolute, stood Sheriff Brody. Elias froze, his hand still tangled in Clara's hair. His eyes widened in shock. Silas, he breathed, his composure shattering. Impossible. Let her go. Vance! Silas growled, his voice a low thunder that seemed to shake the very rafters. He took a step into the room, the shotgun unwavering. Sheriff Brody followed, his own pistol drawn. It's over, Mr. Vance, the sheriff said, his voice hard with newfound conviction. We found the telegraph operator. He remembers your messages well. Messages to a disgraced judge in Laramie, confirming the transfer of funds. Funds stolen from your own family's estate. Elias's face went pale. He shoved Clara away from him, his mind desperately searching for an escape. This is a misunderstanding. She's a hysterical thief. She manipulates. The only manipulator here is you, Silas cut in. He nodded toward Clara. And this is the last woman you will ever lay a hand on. Defeated, Elias's shoulders slumped. The game was over. As Sheriff Brody moved forward to clap the irons on his wrists, Clara scrambled to Silas's side, burying her face in his snow-dusted coat. He wrapped a protective arm around her, holding her tight. The storm still raged outside, but inside the small farmhouse, the echoes of truth had finally silenced the lies. Part 6. Where the Sun Rises. The storm broke with the dawn. Sunlight, brilliant and clear, streamed through the windows, illuminating a world that had been washed clean and new. The snow lay in pristine, glittering drifts, and the air was still and cold, filled with the promise of a new day. In the aftermath of the night's terror, a profound quiet settled over the Kane ranch. Elias Vance was gone, taken by Sheriff Brody to face a justice that had been long overdue. The truth, once a dangerous and burdensome secret, was finally out in the open, and with its release came a sense of liberation that was as bright and overwhelming as the morning sun. Clara sat at the kitchen table, a warm mug of coffee cradled in her hands, her gaze fixed on the endless white landscape outside the window. A purple bruise was beginning to form on her cheek, a faint, physical reminder of the nightmare, but for the first time in years, she felt no fear. The shadows of her past had been confronted and vanquished, not by a miracle, but by her own courage and the unwavering faith of the man who now stood leaning against the doorframe, watching her. Silas had tended to her cut lip and the bruise on her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart ache. He had not pressured her to talk, had not asked for details of the struggle. He had simply been there, a solid, reassuring presence that anchored her in the quiet aftermath. He had stoked the fire, made coffee, and moved about the house with a quiet purpose that spoke of protection and care. Now, he finally broke the comfortable silence. "Sheriff Brody told me what Martha Gable did," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "She marched into his office in the middle of the storm, said she wouldn't leave until he listened. Said character was worth more than a dozen sworn affidavits from rich liars. She's the one who told him to check the telegraph office." A genuine smile touched Clara's lips. "I misjudged her," she admitted. "I saw a hard woman, not a brave one." "This land makes people hard," Silas replied, walking over to the table and sitting across from her. "But it also makes them appreciate what's real." She saw the real you. He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "You were brave last night, Clara. Braver than anyone I've ever known." "I was terrified," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," he said softly. It means you do what's right, even when you are. He held her gaze, and in the depths of his steady, gray eyes, she saw everything he couldn't say. She saw his respect, his admiration, and something deeper, something that made her breath catch in her throat. The barriers they had both kept around their hearts, built from grief and mistrust, had been shattered by the night's events. There was nothing left between them but a raw, undeniable truth. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, her most desperate, and he hadn't flinched. He hadn't tried to save her like a damsel in distress. He had stood beside her and empowered her to save herself. That, she realized, was the heart of true love. It wasn't about rescue, it was about partnership. It was about seeing the strength in another person, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. The sun climbed higher in the sky, flooding the small kitchen with a golden light. The world outside was still frozen, but inside the quiet farmhouse, spring had finally begun to dawn. A week later, the town of Redemption Gulch felt like a different place. The news of Elias Vance's crimes and Clara's innocence had spread like a wildfire, transforming the whispers of condemnation into murmurs of respect and admiration. When she and Silas walked into Martha Gable's store, there were no averted eyes or cold shoulders. Instead, they were met with nods of greeting, faint smiles, and a tangible sense of communal apology. Martha Gable herself greeted Clara with a rare, genuine smile. "Heard you handled yourself well, child," she said, pressing a small bag of her finest candies into Clara's hand. Showed them what real grit looks like. From that day forward, Clara was no longer the fallen woman, but the woman who fought back. Her story became a quiet legend, a testament to resilience in a land that demanded nothing less. The ranch, too, was transformed. The lingering shadows of grief and loneliness that had clung to its walls for so long began to dissipate, replaced by the sounds of shared work and easy laughter. Clara and Silas fell into a new rhythm, one of partnership and unspoken understanding. They mended fences side by side, planted the first seeds in the thawing garden, and sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars emerge in the vast, clear sky. The house no longer felt like his house where she worked. It felt like their home. One evening, as a warm Chinook wind whispered of the coming spring, Silas led her to the small, fenced-off family plot at the edge of the property. A simple wooden cross marked Eleonora's grave. Clara stood back, feeling it was a private space, but Silas beckoned her closer. He knelt and cleared away a few stray leaves from the base of the marker. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life looking backwards," he said, his voice quiet. Honoring her memory meant keeping everyone else out. I was wrong. He stood and turned to face Clara, the setting sun casting a golden glow around him. She believed in second chances. I think she would have wanted me to have one. He took a small object from his pocket. It wasn't a new ring, but an old one, a simple, braided silver band that Clara recognized from the photograph on the mantel. Eleonora's ring. "This ring was a promise of a future I lost," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But a promise doesn't have to die. It can be reborn." He looked down at the ring, then back up at her, his eyes shining with a love that was fierce and true. "Clara Mae Thompson, you walked into my life during the worst kind of winter and brought the sun with you. You taught me that a home is more than just walls and a roof, and that a scar doesn't have to be an ending. It can be a beginning." He held out the ring. "Will you be my wife?" Will you build a new beginning with me? Tears streamed freely down Clara's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally whispered. Yes, Silas. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. They stood together as the last light faded, his arm around her, her head resting on his shoulder. It wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of one, written not in fear and survival, but in the enduring ink of love, courage, and the unbreakable promise of a new day rising. In the vast and unforgiving theater of the American West, stories are not written on paper, but etched into the land and the hearts of those who dare to tame it. The tale of Clara Mae Thompson and Silas Kane is one such story. It began in the desperation of a winter alley, a bargain struck not for love, but for survival. Yet, from that frozen ground of mistrust and hardship, something rare and beautiful managed to grow. Theirs is a testament to the profound truth that our worth is not defined by our past mistakes or the malicious lies of others, but by the courage we show in the face of adversity. Clara, a woman cast out and condemned, found her strength not in hiding from her past, but in confronting it. Silas, a man locked away with his own grief, discovered that the greatest tribute to a lost love is to allow one's heart to love again. Their story reminds us that sometimes the deepest scars are not the ones we can see, but they are also the ones that make us who we are. Love, in its purest form, is not about finding someone without scars, but about finding someone who is brave enough to help you heal yours. Their home was built not with timber and nails, but with trust, respect, and the quiet, unyielding strength of two souls who chose to stand together against the storm. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If the story of Clara and Silas moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing it with someone who loves a timeless tale, and subscribing to Wild West Love Stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story of love, loss, and redemption from the untamed heart of the frontier. What part of their story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.